A racist woman insults a black soldier on a plane, but when she sees the news the next day, she realizes her massive mistake. The waiting area at Chicago O'Hare International Airport was already buzzing with restless travelers on a cold, windy November morning. Announcements sliced through the low hum of conversation, each one reminding passengers to check their gates, watch their belongings, or confirm last-minute schedule changes. Under the fluorescent lights, a diverse mix of people, families with strollers business-suited, professionals, backpack-toting students, converged at Gate 17 for the flight to Atlanta. Initially scheduled for 9 a.m., the flight was delayed, causing dissatisfaction among many. At the center of one group of first-class passengers stood Julia Prescott, a 30-something corporate executive. She wore a tailored gray blazer and pencil skirt, her blonde hair pinned back with an elegant silver barrette. Her black pumps anxiously tapped on the floor. Julia's face held the frustration of someone used to snapping their fingers for immediate results. She was heading to a highly anticipated management conference where she intended to charm her way into a high-profile promotion. Scrolling through emails on her smartphone, each one an urgent message from colleagues expecting her to deliver perfect budgets and presentations, Julia tried to drown out her own impatience. Finally, the crackling overhead announcement came, signaling that first-class passengers could board. Julia exhaled, relieved that she would soon escape the chaos. Clutching her designer handbag and a glossy tote packed with her laptop and files, she walked briskly down the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin was a cozy bubble of extra-wide seats and champagne. Flutes. Julia claimed seat 2A, stowing her bag in the overhead compartment. She made a show of checking her phone one last time, scanning for urgent messages. Moments later, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a crisp army uniform appeared near the front of the cabin. Scanning the row numbers, his name patch read D. Parker. With measured politeness, he nodded at Julia, then pointed to the seat beside her. 2B. Julia's green eyes flickered with annoyance as she acknowledged him with a stiff smile, a swirl of unspoken judgment spinning in her head. I wonder if he's here on some courtesy upgrade or discount. I pay top dollar for my seat, her prejudice whispered. He's probably not even paying full fare. Feeling put out, she sank into her plush seat and snapped her seatbelt, her body language clearly signaling she had zero interest in friendly small talk. Once Daniel Parker settled into his seat, he offered a polite nod toward Julia, but she pointedly turned toward the window. The flight attendants glided down the aisle offering pre-departure beverages, sparkling water, orange juice, or perhaps a mimosa. One attendant, noticing Daniel's uniform, paused and said, "Thank you so much for your service, Sergeant. Please let me know if you need anything." Julia couldn't hide her frustration. Of course, she thought bitterly, the extra perks for the military, everyone tripping over themselves to say thank you. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she reached for her phone, pretending to be busy. Julia had never considered herself overtly racist. In fact, she often boasted to friends that she was colorblind. Yet in moments like these, especially when her privilege or sense of entitlement felt threatened, she found herself quietly resenting those she deemed undeserving. A short while later, with the first-class passengers settled, the cabin doors closed and the plane taxied away from the gate. Daniel discreetly pulled a small photograph from his jacket's inside pocket. Julia noticed out of the corner of her eye that it was a picture of a smiling child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a sparkly headband and holding a soccer ball. Unable to restrain her curiosity turned irritation, Julia said coolly, "Cute kid, your daughter." Daniel turned toward her, surprise flashing across his features. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. That's my daughter, Kayla." Julia almost rolled her eyes at the man. She was proud of her successes, yet somehow she was irritated. "Huh," she said, then added, sarcastically, "She must be proud her dad's in uniform. You traveling home from duty or something?" "I'm actually heading to Atlanta to see her," Daniel replied simply. Julia's nerves were already raw, and something about Daniel not elaborating provoked her further. She felt compelled to poke. "Must be nice to have the airline upgrade you," she said pointedly. "You're in first class, right?" Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I paid for this seat myself. I'm not looking for free handouts, if that's what you're suggesting." His calm but firm tone pushed back against Julia's unspoken biases. She inhaled, forcing herself to appear unfazed, though inside she felt resentful at being contradicted. Tucking an earbud into her right ear, she prepared to retreat behind her music and cut off any further conversation, despite the swirl of disapproval simmering inside her. Mid-flight, the cabin lights dimmed as attendants began, serving lunch, salmon or pasta, with a side salad and warm bread roll. Julia requested a glass of Chardonnay, hoping it would quell the subtle anger roiling in her chest. She glanced at Daniel, who politely declined the wine when an attendant handed him a tray. Again, the attendant expressed gratitude for his service, reminding him that any beverage of his choice would be complimentary. Julia couldn't hold back any longer. She angled herself toward Daniel. "Don't you ever get tired of people fawning over you just because you wear a uniform?" she asked, her tone dripping with hostility. She couldn't fully articulate. His brow furrowed. "I appreciate the kindness, but I don't ask for special treatment." "Really?" Julia countered. "Because it sure seems like everyone goes out of their way to remind you how grateful they are. Meanwhile, the rest of us work just as hard but don't get free upgrades or freebies." Daniel set down his fork. "Ma'am, if it bothers you that much, I can pay for my own meal. It's not a big deal." His voice was controlled, but Julia could sense an undercurrent of pain. She shrugged. "It's not about the meal. It's about the principle." Her statement carried a prejudice she had never openly confronted. Deep inside, she felt uncomfortable around black men, especially those who received public praise or recognition. It challenged her unacknowledged sense of superiority. Daniel looked away, a flicker of hurt crossing his features, but he seemed to decide not to escalate the situation. Instead, he took a breath. "I'm heading to Atlanta because my daughter has a medical issue. I'm just trying to be there for her." Julia froze for a moment, feeling the faintest stir of empathy, but she buried it. "Well, good for you," she murmured, picking at her salad. Probably another sob story about medical bills or something, she told herself. Silence fell between them. Despite her best efforts to bury the flicker of conscience, Julia couldn't entirely dismiss the growing unease. She glanced at the photo again, seeing Kayla's bright smile. For the briefest of moments, Julia felt something akin to guilt, but she quickly hardened her resolve. "I'm just being realistic," she told herself. "Not everyone who wears a uniform is a saint." When the plane touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin. Flight attendants read off the arrival gate and warned of a rainy forecast. Julia unbuckled, eager to distance herself from the soldier she had so brusquely dismissed. She refused to meet Daniel's gaze as she maneuvered into the aisle. As she stepped off the plane, she overheard Daniel on the phone saying, "Yes, Miss Carter, I'm here. I'll be at the hospital soon." The urgency in his voice nagged at the edges of Julia's consciousness, but she pushed the thought aside. "I have a conference to crush," she reminded herself, checking her watch. Inside the terminal, she strode toward baggage claim, ignoring the bustle of families reuniting, business people in a hurry, and tourists gawking at the massive airport signs. Her phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. "We need your updated slides by tonight. Big. Pitch tomorrow. Where are you?" Julia typed a brisk response, glancing over her shoulder once to make sure she wasn't being followed by any well-meaning soldier. At baggage claim, she grabbed her sleek, silver suitcase. Just as she turned around, she spotted Daniel again, this time on the far side, still seemingly on the phone. Something about his lowered head and tense posture tugged at her heart for a split second, but she shook her head, steeling herself against any compassion that might threaten her. Carefully curated outlook. He's not my responsibility. By the time Julia slid into the back seat of her pre-booked car, rain was pelting the windshield to the Hardwood Hotel, please. She instructed the driver. The man nodded and they merged into Atlanta's notorious traffic. Leaning her head back, Julia tried to focus on the big presentation waiting for her in less than 24 hours. She scrolled through her phone, adjusting financial figures and storyline arcs in her pitch deck, but she found it harder than usual to concentrate. A small but persistent voice in her mind replayed the brief conversation with Daniel. The pain flickering in his eyes, the mention of his daughter's medical issue. No, she told herself. I refuse to let that disrupt my sense of order. Soldiers come home all the time with sob stories. Life's tough for everyone, isn't it? Julia's conference kicked off the next morning in a gleaming downtown skyscraper. The event hall buzzed with talk of new market strategies, leadership theories, and whispers of possible corporate mergers. Julia circulated confidently, shaking hands, exchanging business cards, and setting up her laptop for her main presentation. She thrived on the adrenaline of corporate success, each handshake reinforcing her sense of power. After delivering her talk, complete with polished slides, statistics, and a dash of humor, Julia received congratulatory nods. Her phone chirped, and she stepped outside the conference room to check messages in a quiet corridor. She saw a notification from her local Atlanta news app, Local Army Sergeant's Child. Fighting for her life, community rallies for support. The accompanying thumbnail displayed a small image of a hospital room. Ordinarily, Julia would have dismissed such a headline, but she couldn't help clicking this time. The article opened with Sergeant Daniel Parker, recently returned from a tour overseas, is appealing for help with his daughter Kayla, who has been diagnosed with a life-threatening congenital heart defect. Julia stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. The article included a photo, the same bright-eyed girl from Daniel's snapshot. Kayla was hooked up to multiple tubes in a pediatric ICU,